Hi, you're watching a very specially recorded session of Agenda AWANI right here on the sidelines of the ASEAN Integrity Dialogue. Thanks to Institute Integrity Malaysia, I have access to great thought leaders of ASEAN, especially on the issue of integrity and corruption. And one great ASEAN thought leader sitting right across from me is Dr. Siri Laksana Koman. You teach about integrity and anti-corruption measures, I guess.
I do.
At Thammasat University.
Yes, I started a new course called The Economics of Corruption.
Okay.
To prevent corruption,
Correct.
that is, yes.
You also advise the National Anti-Corruption Commission.
I do.
And ACC in Thailand.
Yes.
And thanks to Google, I've managed to steal a look at one or two presentations of yours, like innovations of corruption. I think that was great. But before we go further, I have to allude to the points made by Tan Sri Dr. Surin Pitsuwan. And I like the angle he put where the ASEAN countries will not get out of the middle income trap if corruption, collusion, cronyism is gonna, I'm gonna put the word as steal away our potential. We wouldn't migrate the best of technology around the world to us and make it prosperous because there'll be shortcuts and other methods to dilute and derail that. We wouldn't be able to make sure the bottom 40% of all our communities get the right opportunity. Just like Tan Sri Dr. Surin had to cycle 20 kilometers, maybe there are still children here who have to go on long boats 4 hours before school just to get to school. So how do we ensure that the rise of GDP, for example, commensurates to the very marginalized to get ahead of the curve? So these are the points made by Tan Sri Dr. Surin. I would like to get your point on this because we have to look at this not only as a nation but also as a grouping and community of ASEAN. And the word founding father resonates more with you than with me for having such a visionary father. Your late father was really crucial with Tun Razak and Adam Malik to see the formation of ASEAN. So how do you put that strong legacy? Because if we do not ensure that we fight corruption, then what's the point of having a community? Because it wouldn't be able to help the least privileged to be ahead.
Exactly. I was teaching economics at Thammasat University for many, many years, and your question is precisely the reason why I joined the Anti-Corruption Commission, because I had been doing research on education policy, health financing, education reform, but I could see that none of these reforms would work as long as a portion of the government budget, and very often it's a large portion of the government budget, gets hijacked and diverted into private pockets. And so it's absolutely crucial to maintain society and to get rid of inequality, because ultimately corruption is about injustice. It's about schools that don't get built, it's about hospitals, it's about care, the quality of education that doesn't get upgraded because some of the budget is diverted into private hands. And so it's ultimately about injustice. And if we don't fight injustice, Desmond Tutu said that if we are faced with injustice and we do nothing, then we are on the side of the oppressor.
Correct. With that view, because in Southeast Asia, I mean, we've only had a few decades of our own will to run and govern, because we, some of us, many of us emerged from colonialism. Thailand was the more lucky one, was never colonized. But still, the ecosystem around Southeast Asia was very much colonized. So if we now have our own power, then we should be better at governing and bringing to light the plight of our people. However, this very evil corruption sidesteps all this. And yet, they are done by our own people.
Yes.
No more subjugation from the outside.
That's right.
But this is subjugation from within. So hence, the thinking of the people down on the grassroots level, the issue is about power. When I learned 101 of politics, it was never about politics itself, but it's always about a system of ensuring who gets what, resources being allocated and ensured. When I took Economic 101, the word resource was also there.
Yes.
So I would like your great wisdom to tie those two together, because especially for Southeast Asian nations, leadership is where the center of power is. Maybe in the more developed European Union or America, they have many other institutions of checks and balances. But for Southeast Asian nations, roughly, the center of power is still very much where all hopes are.
You mentioned that most of the countries in the region had been colonized, and you mentioned that Thailand was lucky in that Thailand was never colonized. But I think there are great similarities between Thailand and the neighboring countries, because the historical development is very important. In Thailand, there were centers of power. There were kingdoms up in Chiang Mai, up in Ayutthaya. Yes, so there were small kingdoms. And so to be able to rise up and get along in the world, you have to prove yourself to the leader. In the olden days, perhaps it was based on merit, because if you are a great fighter, if you are good at organization, then you are rewarded by the leader. But it builds this culture that you have to have a patron, because no one else owns the resources. Now, when you have like the kings of Thailand in the past, they were benevolent because the country belonged to them. And so it was also in their interest to develop the country and to help the poor, because the poor belong to the king as well. So because of this ownership, if I may use that word, the resources were distributed, but it still had that culture of having to perform, having to be affiliated with power. And so even when we have elections, that whole culture still exists. People who vote for certain political parties, they vote for them because this politician goes to their son's ordination, goes to their daughter's wedding, goes to their parents' funeral. They don't look at the policies of the politicians or even his own behavior. Corrupt behavior may be staring at them, in the face, but they feel that this person is good to us. This person is good to our family. We can depend on him. And I think it's also the failure of the state in providing basic services. Because if the people feel that they cannot rely on the state, the system to provide them with running water, good schools and so on,
health,
these are the people who can build the bridges for them. And so they feel obligated, and even though they are faced with the evidence that these people steal from the country, they would still feel obligated.
It's okay because he helped us.
Yes. So these people, even though we put out the facts, present the evidence that they stole money from the taxpayers, which are them, but they said, they will always win the elections. And so it's something that we have to fight against.
Doctor, I have to stop for a while for the first commercial break, but once we are back, I would like to continue that point, coupled with this very interesting opening of your presentation slide I saw on SlideShare, which is about politics and cows. Maybe we can weave in together, because I think it's very apt, especially for our region of the world, for that discussion, because at the end of the day, it's ironic how people appreciate getting a few hundreds of ringgits or maybe a few thousand bahts. when the person giving them the few hundreds or even thousands are getting billions of the people's own money.
That's right.
And that is that was the point. I want to link it to the analogy of politics and cows by Dr. Right after this short break. I'm still here at the ASEAN Integrity Dialogue 2017, still here with the great Dr. Siri Laksana Koman. If it's happening, and it's been happening for decades, for example, what's our hope? Because an entrenched, bad, insidious system will always protect its own, will grow bigger and bigger, incorporate more people and communities into it, and they'll become an institution sort of by themselves. And if it happens at the national level, it will influence politics and hence governance. And then what alternative do we have?
This is a very difficult situation to tackle, and we have to have several pronged approaches to it. First of all, we have to educate the younger generation. We have to instill good values and integrity. But I'm sure that all of our societies do that.
Yes.
They don't become corrupt when they're young.
Correct.
But they see the corruption all around them. In some of our countries, to even go to kindergarten, you have to pay tea money to the school so that you can get in. So the children see that right from the beginning. This is a very, very difficult culture to break. But we still have to push forward and educate the children that ultimately it hurts them. Secondly, we have to prevent all these corrupt activities from occurring. That is, there are many ways to do this. The cows are like a project, the subsidies to certain kinds of production. It needs to be more transparent. What we need is fiscal transparency. That is the use of government funds and the revenue from that the government collects. It needs to be clearly shown, and the public needs to be informed. I think that with a more educated population, the people would want to know where their tax money goes. In Thailand, we now have a website, a portal, Android-based, that people can click on using their phones to see by agency where the money goes, where their tax is used. They can see the projects by agency, what levels, and who gets the contracts.
Correct.
So we hope that if we build up this this mass of concerned citizens who know that ultimately it's the whole country or the region that suffers. Because if we have a culture, if we are known for these corrupt dealings, we will not be able to attract foreign investors. We won't be able to attract good companies who will not resort to bribery to win contracts. If we do not have a level playing field, we will not have access to the kinds of technology that we need to access now in this digital age.
Agreed, Dr. Siri Laksana, full of wisdom. We have to go for the last break, but once we are back, sometimes I wish we have an ideal ecosystem where we can just hit the reset button, but we do not have that.
No.
And maybe starting from Thailand, but you can leverage it out to the whole Southeast Asia. The separation of power, how crucial is that in the fight against corruption? Not to say that if we don't really have clear separation, automatically corruption happens, but more from the perspective of insidious minds will always find insidious ways, and sometimes they're more creative and innovative than the people on the path. People who strays will have to work harder, but they do that because they get more rewards. So how do we ensure the separation of power and governance, because I think, like you said, with transparency, with clear governance, we can fight corruption. However, the people in power and those vested interests will always, it's like honey and the bees. The bees will always come to honey. So good people in governance will always be the honey, and all these people trying to be rent seekers will always fly to honey and find a way. So the way for the civil society to fight, to have a chance, is to ensure that from the beginning, the paths are split and there are clear demarcations of borders and lines. How do we do that? In a system where we cannot reset, but have to make do with what we have. Some of us still have colonial legacies. For Thailand, you have all the kingdoms you mentioned before and the patron kind of thinking. Let's talk about that after this short break. Never enough time with great people. Dr. Siri Laksana Koman, my first ever interview. I hope it's not going to be my last. Lots of wisdom to share. And I'm just going to go straight to it. The hypothesis I was putting before was that for transparency to happen, clear institutional separation of power, check and balances need to happen in a very healthy democratic system. But we can't hit the reset button. We have what we have. A lot of us in Southeast Asia have legacy systems from even Independence Day kind of thing. So I want to relate that to we always look to the West for transparency and governance, and the Americans had revolution just to prove that point. But the subprime crisis, for example, the rating agencies give AAA credit ratings to CDOs and CDS. Prof knows about this better. Credit debt swaps and everything else. The fact that it was named subprime is because these are not prime market to be lending, but we give them anyway, and we have 5, 6, 7 financing or loans to one person or entity, and then we join many people's loans and entities, and we sell them as financial papers internationally, bankrupted Iceland.
Yes.
So if at the very highest level of where we hope to see good governance, that happened, no one has been prosecuted for subprime crisis practically. And then how are we going to talk about a national system or even Southeast Asia? Prof, can you please give us enlightenment on this road?
I think it's extremely important to have checks and balances. And you know, in many Western countries, this philosophy of reducing regulation had been going around for decades, to reduce the role of government, to let the private sector, which is more efficient, run the show. But what was wrong was that we should not have reduced regulation. We should have re-regulated.
I see.
The different kinds of regulation. Let the private sector operate, but you still have to have the oversight, the supervision, and you cannot do away with that. And I think the subprime crisis that you mentioned, everyone had no accountability or responsibility. The broker who was selling real estate to people without any credit, people who had no real source of income, they got their commission, and they didn't have to be responsible for whether these people who can pay back or not. And even if the financial institution, the small financial institutions go broke, the person who sold this already got his commission. And so it's a lack of oversight at each step of the way. So I think we have not to regulate more, but you have to regulate smart and allow certain activities more free rein, more free market mechanisms to operate, but at the same time be very vigilant in terms of oversight.
Correct.
So I still have hope.
Yeah.
Maybe perhaps not in our lifetime or my lifetime, but I think we don't need to be hostages of our past.
Correct.
In Thailand, we created independent institutions. Why? Because, you know, in many countries we don't have an anti-corruption commission in the world. Because the Justice Department, the police,
Yes,
they're
it's
doing
enough,
their
yeah.
job. It's enough. But because we didn't trust the institutions that we had, one of our former prime ministers set up the first anti-corruption commission in 1975, a long time ago.
Yes.
But he set it up under the prime minister's office. And so it was seen as a paper tiger.
Yes.
That prime minister who set up this commission was very, very honest. His integrity was beyond reproach.
Yes.
But when he left office, he was only prime minister. He was a caretaker prime minister for only 1 year. And after that, this agency, the Anti-Corruption Commission, was seen as a paper tiger who couldn't do anything, who couldn't investigate the ruling prime minister or ministers or the cabinet, until we had a constitution, a new constitution in 1997, coinciding with our financial crisis,
Yes.
which dominoed across
Yes.
the region. We had a new constitution that was hailed as an enlightened constitution, and that set up independent agencies. The Auditor General was independent, anti-corruption was independent, and set up more organizations like the Human Rights Commission, the Ombudsman. So different organizations were set up, and these were independent. Independent in the sense that they are not appointed by the Prime Minister or the government. There's a search process. Different agencies have different procedures, but for the Anti-Corruption Commission, anyone could apply.
Yeah.
For the search process, when this constitution came into place, 200 people applied. And the search committee narrowed the number of candidates down to 18 and submitted the names to the Senate, which is different from the House of Representatives. And the Senate chose 9 out of the 18. And so we have this process. And the commissioners, the anti-corruption commissioners, cannot be fired by the government. They can be removed if there is evidence of wrongdoing. Then 2/3 majority of the Senate can remove them.
Okay.
Yes.
Doctor, I wish we could continue on and on, but that's all the time we have. Thank you so much. I think
It's a pleasure.
Within our lifetime, we will see strong shoots or green buds of hope moving forward.
I think we can see changes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to you for watching. Thanks to Institute Integrity Malaysia for making this possible. I'll see you in another episode of Agenda Awani very, very soon. Good night and goodbye.